3 months ago I discovered my husband had been secretly draining our savings to buy luxury gifts for his secretary, but that betrayal was just the beginning. I was checking our joint account balance last Tuesday morning when I noticed something strange. A series of charges I didn't recognize: expensive jewelry store purchases, high-end restaurant bills, even a weekend spa retreat package. My heart started racing as I scrolled through the transactions. Each one was substantial, ranging from $200 to over $1,000, all within the past 6 weeks. At first I thought maybe our account had been compromised. Identity theft was my immediate assumption because there was no way my husband would make these purchases without telling me. We'd been married for 8 years and always discussed any major expenses together. It was one of our unspoken rules: anything over $50 got mentioned, and anything over $200 required a conversation. I called the bank immediately, my hands shaking as I waited on hold. The representative was helpful but delivered news that made my stomach drop. All the transactions had been made with our debit card, using the correct PIN. No signs of fraud or unauthorized access. Someone with legitimate access to our account had been making these purchases. My mind raced through possibilities. Only 3 people had access to this account: me, my husband, and theoretically our teenage daughter, though she only had a savings account linked to ours with very limited access. I hadn't made any of these purchases, and our daughter was away at summer camp without any access to significant funds. That left only one possibility, but I couldn't bring myself to accept it yet. I decided to do some detective work before confronting anyone. The jewelry store charges caught my attention first. They were all from the same upscale boutique downtown, not far from my husband's office. I drove there during my lunch break, my heart pounding the entire way. The saleswoman was friendly and recognized the transaction numbers when I showed them to her. She couldn't give me specific details due to privacy policies, but she did mention that a man had been in several times recently, buying gifts for someone special. She described him, and it was definitely my husband: tall, graying at the temples, always wore his lucky blue tie on important days. The restaurant charges were easier to investigate. I called pretending to be confirming a reservation, and the hostess mentioned that the gentleman who made those reservations always requested the romantic corner table for 2. She even mentioned he'd become a regular, always with the same young woman with dark curly hair. My husband's secretary had dark curly hair. I felt like I was going to be sick right there in the restaurant parking lot. 8 years of marriage, 2 kids, a mortgage we'd worked so hard to qualify for, and he was spending our money on another woman. Not just any woman: his secretary, someone I'd met at company parties, someone I'd made small talk with about her college classes and weekend plans. The drive home was a blur of emotions. Anger, betrayal, confusion, and underneath it all, a deep sadness that felt like it might swallow me whole. I kept thinking about all the times recently when he'd seemed distant, all the late nights at the office, all the times he'd been glued to his phone with what he claimed were work emails. I needed more evidence before I could confront him. Part of me still hoped there was some innocent explanation, though I couldn't imagine what that might be. That evening, I waited until he went to shower before checking his phone. I'd never done anything like this before. We'd always trusted each other completely. But desperate times called for desperate measures. His phone was unlocked, and I went straight to his messages. What I found there destroyed the last shred of hope I'd been clinging to. Months of messages between him and his secretary, starting professional but quickly becoming personal, then intimate, then explicitly romantic. Photos I won't describe, plans for secret meetings, and worst of all, messages about how grateful she was for all the beautiful gifts he'd been buying her. The spa weekend I'd seen charged to our account that was their romantic getaway. The jewelry, anniversary gifts for their 6-month relationship milestone. The expensive dinners, their regular date nights while I was home with our kids, thinking he was working late to provide for our family. I screenshots everything with trembling hands, then deleted the evidence of my snooping from his phone. I needed time to process this information and figure out my next steps. Sleep was impossible that night. I lay next to my husband, this man I'd loved and trusted completely, listening to him breathe peacefully while my world crumbled around me. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw those messages, those photos, the casual way they'd discussed spending my family's money on their affair. The next morning, I called in sick to work. I couldn't imagine sitting in meetings and pretending everything was normal when my entire life had just imploded. Instead, I spent the day researching divorce lawyers and trying to figure out our financial situation. What I discovered made everything so much worse. The money he'd been spending wasn't just from our checking account, he'd also been taking cash advances on our credit cards and had even borrowed against his retirement fund. We were in debt to the tune of nearly $30,000, money that had been spent on his affair while I'd been carefully budgeting our groceries and putting off necessary car repairs. I felt so stupid. All those times I'd suggested we couldn't afford a family vacation or when I'd stressed about unexpected medical bills, he'd been lavishing expensive gifts on another woman. I'd been wearing the same winter coat for 5 years while she was getting designer jewelry charged to our joint account. The betrayal cut deeper than I ever imagined possible. This wasn't just cheating, it was financial abuse, stealing from our family's future to fund his selfish desires. I made an appointment with a divorce attorney for the following week, but I knew I had to confront him first. I deserved answers, and more importantly, I needed to protect what was left of our assets before he could spend any more. Friday evening, after the kids were in bed, I presented him with printed copies of the bank statements and some of the text messages. I didn't yell or scream, though part of me wanted to. Instead, I just placed the papers on the coffee table in front of him and waited. The color drained from his face as he realized what he was looking at. For a moment, he looked like he might try to deny it, but the evidence was overwhelming. Instead, he just sat there staring at the papers, his hands shaking. When he finally spoke, it wasn't the apology or explanation I'd been expecting. Instead, he tried to minimize everything, claiming it wasn't serious, that he'd gotten caught up in something he never meant to happen. He said she'd been going through a difficult time, and he was just trying to help her feel better. He actually tried to frame his affair as an act of kindness. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. He was sitting there trying to justify stealing from our family to buy gifts for his mistress. There was no remorse in his voice, no real acknowledgement of what he'd done to our marriage or our financial security. That's when I told him I'd already consulted with an attorney and would be filing for divorce. The shock on his face was almost comical. Apparently, he'd assumed I would just accept his weak explanations and move on. He'd underestimated me completely. Update 1. The past 2 weeks have been absolutely insane, and I need to update you all on what's been happening because this situation has taken turns I never could have predicted. After I confronted my husband with the evidence and told him I was filing for divorce, I expected him to either beg for forgiveness or get angry and defensive. Instead, he just nodded and said he understood, which honestly caught me off guard. He seemed almost relieved that everything was out in the open. He moved out that weekend, staying at his brother's place while we figured out the legal stuff. The kids took it harder than I expected, especially our 12-year-old who kept asking if Daddy was coming back. I tried to explain that sometimes adults grow apart without getting into the messy details, but kids are smarter than we give them credit for. What happened next, though, I never saw coming. On Monday morning, my husband's secretary called me. I almost didn't answer when I saw her name on my caller ID, but curiosity got the better of me. She was crying, barely coherent, begging me to meet with her. She said there were things I needed to know, things that would change everything. Against my better judgment, I agreed to meet her at a coffee shop downtown. I'll admit, part of me wanted to see the woman who'd helped destroy my marriage face to face. I expected to feel angry or hurt, but when I saw her sitting there, looking absolutely devastated, I mostly felt confused. She was nothing like I'd imagined. Young, yes, but not the confident homewrecker I'd pictured. She looked terrified and kept apologizing before she even started talking. Then she told me something that made my blood run cold. My husband had been lying to her too. He'd told her we were already separated, that we'd been living separate lives for over a year and were just waiting for the divorce to be finalized. He'd shown her fake legal documents, convinced her that their relationship was completely legitimate. She genuinely believed she was dating a man who was already divorced. But it gets worse. He'd been telling her that the expensive gifts were necessary to keep up appearances at work, that as his assistant, she needed to look professional and successful. He'd convinced her that the company had a budget for employee enhancement, and the gifts were essentially work expenses. She'd been uncomfortable with the expensive presents but believed his explanations. She only found out the truth when she overheard him on a phone call with his brother, talking about how I'd discovered everything and was filing for divorce. That's when she realized he'd been lying to her about everything: our marriage status, where the money was coming from, even basic details about his life. I sat there listening to her story, feeling this weird mix of emotions. I was still angry about the affair, but I was also starting to realize that she'd been manipulated just as much as I had, maybe more. She was young, barely 24, and had trusted someone she saw as a mentor and authority figure. She begged me to believe her, showing me the fake documents he'd given her, the lies he'd told about our marriage. She even offered to testify in the divorce proceedings if it would help me get a better settlement. She said she felt sick knowing that her relationship with him had cost me and my children our financial security. I left that meeting feeling like my head was spinning. The man I'd been married to for 8 years wasn't just a cheater, he was a manipulative liar who'd deceived both of us to get what he wanted. The secretary wasn't the villain in this story after all. We were both victims of his elaborate deception. That evening, I called my attorney and told her about this new development. She was fascinated by the fake documents and said they could potentially strengthen my case significantly. If we could prove he'd been systematically lying and forging documents, it showed a pattern of deceit that would work in my favor during settlement negotiations. But the biggest shock was still coming. 2 days later, I got a call from my husband's company's human resources department. Apparently, they'd been conducting an internal investigation based on some irregularities they'd noticed, and they wanted to interview me as part of their process. It turns out, my husband hadn't just been stealing from our family account to fund his fake relationship, he'd also been embezzling money from his company. The expensive gifts, the restaurant bills, the spa weekend, some of that had been paid for with funds he'd been skimming from client accounts over the past 8 months. The HR representative couldn't give me all the details due to their ongoing investigation, but she did say that the amounts involved were substantial and that they'd be pursuing both civil and criminal charges. My husband wasn't just losing his job, he was potentially looking at prison time. I hung up that phone call feeling like I was living in some kind of nightmare. The man I'd shared a bed with, the father of my children, wasn't just an unfaithful husband, he was an actual criminal who'd been living a double life for months. Everything started making sense in the most horrible way possible. His recent stress, the way he'd been secretive about work, the times I'd caught him on late-night phone calls he claimed were with difficult clients. He hadn't been having a typical affair, he'd been running an elaborate scam that involved stealing from multiple sources to maintain his fake relationship. The secretary called me again that same evening, absolutely hysterical. The company had interviewed her too, and she'd learned the full extent of what had been happening. She kept apologizing, saying she felt responsible even though she'd been lied to just as much as everyone else. I actually found myself comforting her, which was surreal. Here was the woman who'd been sleeping with my husband, and I was reassuring her that none of this was her fault. But it really wasn't, she'd been manipulated by someone she trusted, just like I had been. My attorney called the next morning with more news. With the criminal charges pending, she was confident we could get an emergency order to freeze all of our remaining assets and ensure that I'd have priority access to whatever funds were left. She also thought the criminal activity would significantly impact any spousal support discussions. Courts don't look favorably on criminals trying to claim alimony. The kids still don't know the full extent of what their father has done. They know we're getting divorced and that daddy made some bad choices, but they don't need to know about the criminal charges or the full details of the affair. I'm trying to protect them from the worst of it while still being honest about the fact that our family is changing. My parents have been amazing through all of this. They flew in from across the country to help with the kids and provide emotional support. My mom keeps saying she never trusted him completely, which is both comforting and annoying. Why didn't she say something earlier? The strangest part of all this is how the secretary and I have somehow become allies in this mess. She's been providing evidence to both my attorney and the company's investigators, and she's genuinely trying to help me recover financially from the damage her relationship with him caused. It's the weirdest friendship that never should have existed, but here we are. I keep waiting for the other shoe to drop because this situation keeps getting more complicated every day. Just when I think I understand the full scope of what happened, something new comes to light that makes everything even worse and more bizarre. Update 2. I honestly don't even know where to begin with this update. If you told me 3 months ago that my life would become this complicated, I would have laughed at you. The criminal investigation has wrapped up, the divorce is moving forward, and somehow things have gotten even more twisted than I could have imagined. First, the legal stuff. My husband was formally charged with embezzlement and fraud last month. The company's investigation revealed that he'd been stealing from client accounts for nearly a year, not just the 8 months they initially suspected. The total amount was over $60,000, most of which went toward maintaining his fake relationship with his secretary. He took a plea deal to avoid a lengthy trial, which means 18 months in minimum security prison plus 3 years of probation. He'll also have to pay full restitution to his former company, though they've indicated they'll be going after our marital assets to recover their losses. My attorney managed to protect most of our house equity and my personal savings by proving that I had no knowledge of his criminal activity. The court agreed that I shouldn't be financially punished for crimes I didn't know were being committed. Still, we'll have to sell the house to pay the legal fees and restitution, but at least I'll walk away with something to start over with. The divorce was finalized 2 weeks ago. No spousal support, joint custody of the kids with me as primary guardian, and a pretty straightforward division of what assets remained after all the legal costs. He didn't contest anything. His attorney advised him that fighting would only make his criminal sentencing worse. But here's where things get really strange. Remember the secretary I mentioned? The one who turned out to be as much a victim of his manipulation as I was? Well, we've somehow become actual friends through this entire nightmare. I know how that sounds. Becoming friends with your husband's mistress isn't exactly normal, but nothing about this situation has been normal from the beginning. She was genuinely deceived about everything: our marriage status, where the money was coming from, even basic facts about his life. She's been dealing with her own trauma from being manipulated and used. She lost her job when the embezzlement came to light, even though she was cleared of any wrongdoing. The company felt it was too complicated to keep her employed given her involvement in the situation. She's been struggling financially and emotionally, and I found myself actually feeling sorry for her. We started meeting for coffee occasionally, initially just to coordinate our testimonies for the legal proceedings. But gradually, these meetings became more like therapy sessions where we'd talk through what had happened to both of us. She's only 24, and this was her first serious relationship. She trusted someone who seemed mature and established, and he completely took advantage of that trust. The more we talked, the more I realized that in some weird way, we were both grieving the same person, the man we thought he was, who turned out to never have existed at all. She'd fallen in love with a divorced man who was generous and caring, while I'd been married to a dedicated family man who worked hard to provide for us. Neither of those men were real. Last month, she made a decision that shocked everyone, including me. She's decided to pay me back every penny she can remember receiving from him during their relationship. She's calculated the value of all the gifts, the dinners, the spa weekend, everything she can remember, and she's working 2 jobs to pay me restitution even though she's not legally required to do so. I tried to tell her it wasn't necessary, that she was as much a victim as I was, but she insisted. She said she couldn't live with herself knowing that I was struggling financially because of money that had been spent on her, even if she hadn't known where it was coming from. She's already given me $3,000, and she's determined to continue until she's repaid what she estimates to be about $15,000 total. It's the most surreal situation I've ever been in. The woman who unknowingly helped destroy my marriage is now working herself to exhaustion to help rebuild my financial stability. My friends think I'm crazy for accepting her money, but honestly, I need it. The legal fees ate up most of my savings, and starting over as a single mom is expensive. The kids have adjusted better than I expected, though they're still processing everything. They know their father made bad choices and has to face consequences, but they don't know the full details of the criminal charges or the affair. My 12-year-old asked me last week if Daddy was sick in his brain, which honestly might be the most accurate way to describe what happened. They've met the secretary a few times when she's come by to drop off restitution payments, and they seem to like her. She's good with kids, probably because she's still pretty young herself. It's bizarre watching my children interact normally with someone who was technically the other woman in their parents' marriage, but they don't know that context and probably never will. My ex-husband starts his prison sentence next month. I haven't spoken to him directly since the day I confronted him with the evidence, and I don't plan to. He's tried to reach out a few times through his attorney, claiming he wants to apologize and explain everything, but I'm not interested in hearing whatever justifications he's come up with. The secretary told me he tried to contact her too, apparently wanting to rekindle their relationship once he gets out of prison. She blocked his number immediately and told him through her attorney that she never wants to see him again. She said the man she thought she was in love with never existed, so there's nothing to go back to. We've both been seeing counselors to work through the trauma of being so thoroughly deceived by someone we trusted. It's helping, though I still have moments where I feel like I'm living in someone else's life. The woman I was 6 months ago, married, financially stable, trusting, feels like a completely different person. The house goes on the market next week. It's bittersweet because this is where we brought both babies home from the hospital, where we celebrated birthdays and holidays, where I thought we were building a life together. But it's also full of memories of someone who turned out to be a lie, so maybe it's time for a fresh start anyway. I've found a smaller place to rent in a good school district, and the kids seem excited about the move. They're treating it like an adventure rather than a loss, which helps me stay positive about everything. The most unexpected part of this whole experience has been discovering my own strength. 6 months ago, I would have said I couldn't handle being a single parent, couldn't manage the finances alone, couldn't start over at my age. But I've done all of those things and more. I've navigated criminal investigations and divorce proceedings, I've protected my children from adult problems while still being honest with them, and I've somehow found forgiveness for someone who was technically my husband's affair partner. I'm not sure what the next chapter of my life looks like, but for the first time in months, I'm actually looking forward to finding out. The man who nearly destroyed my family is facing the consequences of his choices. I'm building something new and better from the wreckage he left behind, and I've discovered that I'm much stronger and more resilient than I ever knew. Final update. It's been 6 months since my last update, and I wanted to close out this chapter of my story because so much has changed and evolved in ways I never could have predicted. My ex-husband is currently 4 months into his prison sentence. The kids visit him once a month, which was a decision I struggled with for a long time. My therapist helped me understand that maintaining some relationship with their father, even given everything that happened, was probably healthier for them in the long run than cutting him off completely. The visits are supervised and brief, but the kids seem to handle them well. He's been writing letters to me, which I initially threw away without reading. But curiosity eventually got the better of me, and I started reading them. They're not what I expected, no attempts at reconciliation or justification for what he did. Instead, they're mostly him trying to process how he became the kind of person who could deceive everyone he claimed to love. He's been participating in therapy programs in prison and seems to be genuinely trying to understand his own behavior. I'll probably never respond to his letters, but reading them has helped me let go of some of the anger I was carrying. Understanding that he was as confused about his own actions as everyone else was doesn't excuse what he did, but it does make it easier for me to move forward without that constant rage burning in my chest. The secretary, I should probably start calling her by her name now that we've become actual friends, has become one of the most important people in my life. She finished paying me back the full $15,000 last month, working 2 jobs for 8 months to make it happen. I tried multiple times to tell her it wasn't necessary, but she was determined to make things right in whatever way she could. What started as her guilt-driven mission to pay restitution has evolved into a genuine friendship that I never saw coming. She's helped me move into my new place, she babysits the kids when I need to work late, and she's become like a younger sister to me. My friends were initially skeptical about this friendship, but they've seen how much she's supported me through everything and they've accepted her into our circle. She's also been dating someone new for the past 2 months, a guy she met in one of her evening classes who knows nothing about our complicated history. She was nervous about telling me when they started getting serious, worried that I might feel weird about it. But honestly, I'm happy for her. She deserves to experience what a healthy relationship looks like after what my ex-husband put her through. The kids absolutely adore her. They don't know about her connection to their father, and probably never will unless they figure it out themselves when they're older. To them, she's just my friend who's really good at helping with math homework and makes amazing chocolate chip cookies. She's taken them to movies, helped with school projects, and been there for all the little moments that single parenting can be overwhelming for. I've started dating again, which feels surreal after everything that happened. I met someone through a colleague at work, a divorced dad who understands the complications of blended families and starting over after a marriage ends badly. We've been taking things very slowly, but he's patient and kind and nothing like the man I was married to for 8 years. The kids like him, which was my biggest worry about dating again. He doesn't try to be their father or replace anyone in their lives, he's just a nice man who treats their mother well and remembers what snacks they like when he comes over for dinner. That's exactly what we all need right now. Financially, I'm doing better than I expected. The restitution payments helped me get established in our new place, and I got a promotion at work that came with a significant salary increase. I'm not where I was when I was married, but I'm stable and building something that's entirely mine. There's something empowering about knowing that every dollar in my account was earned by me and that no one can take that security away without my knowledge. The house sold quickly and for more than we expected, which meant I walked away with enough money to put a decent down payment on a small place of my own. I'm closing on a townhouse next month, 3 bedrooms, small yard, good schools, and most importantly, no memories of a life that turned out to be built on lies. I've been thinking a lot about forgiveness lately, not because I think my ex-husband deserves it, but because carrying anger and resentment was exhausting me. I've forgiven him not for his sake, but for mine and the kids. That doesn't mean I trust him or want him back in my life, but it means I'm not wasting emotional energy on hating him anymore. I've also had to forgive myself for not seeing the signs sooner, for trusting someone who was manipulating me, for not protecting my family's financial security better. That's been harder than forgiving him, honestly. But my therapist keeps reminding me that his ability to deceive me doesn't reflect poorly on my judgment, it reflects poorly on his character. The most surprising part of this entire experience has been discovering parts of myself I never knew existed. I always thought of myself as someone who needed a partner to feel complete, who couldn't handle major challenges alone, who was too trusting for my own good. But I've navigated a criminal investigation, a messy divorce, single parenthood, financial recovery, and even formed an unlikely friendship with someone who should have been my enemy. I'm not the same person I was a year ago, and I'm grateful for that. The woman I was before was naive in ways that made her vulnerable to manipulation. The woman I am now is still trusting and open-hearted, but she's also stronger and more self-reliant. She knows her own worth and won't accept less than she deserves from anyone. The kids have grown through this experience too. They've seen their mother handle adversity with grace, they've learned that families can take many different forms, and they've developed resilience that will serve them well throughout their lives. My 12-year-old told me last week that she's proud of how I handled everything, which meant more to me than any compliment I've ever received. Looking back on everything that happened, I can honestly say that discovering my husband's betrayal was the worst and best thing that ever happened to me. Worst because it shattered everything I thought I knew about my life and my marriage. Best because it freed me from a relationship with someone who was capable of elaborate deception and financial abuse, and it showed me strength I never knew I possessed. If someone had told me a year ago that I'd end up friends with my husband's mistress, living in a different house, dating someone new, and genuinely happy with my life, I would have thought they were describing someone else's story. But here I am, and this is my reality now. I don't know what the next chapter holds, but I'm not afraid of it anymore. I've learned that I can handle whatever comes my way, that my children are resilient and adaptable, and that sometimes the worst betrayals can lead to the most unexpected blessings. The life I'm building now is smaller in some ways but richer in others, and most importantly, it's completely authentic. My ex-husband took a lot from me: my trust, my financial security, my sense of safety in my own marriage. But he also inadvertently gave me something valuable: the knowledge that I'm capable of surviving anything and rebuilding something beautiful from the ruins. That's not a gift I would have chosen to receive in the way it came, but it's one I'll treasure for the rest of my life.